In this video, I'll be reviewing Dungeon of the Endless, which is a pixel art roguelite that has a unique mix of tower defense elements, as well as dungeon defense elements and RPG elements. It's also a unique mix of turn-based and live-action gameplay. As part of the game, you fight through a series of rooms and floors to escape this crashed ship while defending your crystal. Once you find the exit on each level, you then run the crystal to the exit and go up and up each floor until you escape the crashed ship. In terms of the gameplay, as I mentioned earlier, Dungeon of the Endless is a unique mix of RPG elements, tower defense elements, and dungeon defense elements. And in terms of how it plays, not really necessarily in terms of the literal gameplay, but in terms of how it feels a lot like faster than light. And so at the core of the game, you try to get up a series of floors. You do that by entering doors or rooms one by one. And each time you enter a door, it's basically like a turn. So between door openings, there's nothing going on. And as you open the door, you'll get your next round of resources, a bunch of monsters will spawn that you'll have to kill. And so that's sort of the live action part. So in that sense, it's a mix of live action and turn-based gameplay. But additionally, another element that's unique to this, that's also present in Faster Than Light, is that you can pause the game at any time. So even between opening doors, you can pause, and during that pause time, you can queue up building towers, you can queue up moving your heroes around, you can queue up switching around their equipment. So there's that sort of turn-based element as well. In regard to the RPG elements, you can control up to 4 heroes, depending on what game mode you're playing. And that's sort of where the RPG elements come in. So you can level up these heroes, you can gear these heroes, different heroes with different abilities, different strengths, they have different stats for various things. So that's sort of where the RPG elements come in. But if you keep playing after a while, you'll find that a lot of these heroes tend to fit stereotypical roles. So you'll have like a damage, kill a bunch of enemies type of hero. You'll have a runner, which is basically someone you can have to move your crystal around really fast. So while each of the heroes can be different from each other, you'll find that a lot of the heroes sort of fit into one type of hero. The tower defense and dungeon defense elements come in, and then as you open the rooms, you open the doors, play each turn, get your resources. You can power certain rooms, and if you power a room, then you can build towers, modules that give you resources, those kind of things. And then on some turns, monsters will spawn in various rooms that are not powered up but that don't have any heroes in them, and they'll try to attack your modules, attack your towers, destroy your crystal to make you lose the game. So that's sort of where it has that dungeon defense kind of feel. In terms of the length of each game, it's really not a fast game at all. When you first start playing, it's kind of difficult. It's kind of hard to first learn everything. There's not a lot of skills, not a lot of knowledge that carries over from other roguelites because it's so unique in a lot of different ways. It's not necessarily hard to understand what each resource does or what the mechanics are, but there's a lot of things that are really not clear about what to do strategy-wise with all these resources. And there's a lot of things in the game that aren't explained very well. So for example, sometimes you run across merchants who will sell you items, and the item will give your character some passive ability. And it'll name the passive ability, but won't explain what the passive ability is. So you kind of have to either know it in advance or look it up online. So that's definitely a flaw, I would say, in the game. It makes it harder to learn originally. But once you actually start getting decent at the game, a full clear can take up to like an hour and a half. So it's really sort of not a game you pick up and play for 10 minutes and then just drop unless you want save your run halfway through. And sort of a negative in that is that some of that hour and a half can be a little boring after you played for a while, because it's not necessarily high stakes. You're just opening more doors to get more resources, or just trying to figure out where the exit is. So it's not necessarily an action-packed hour and a half. But sort of the last thing I want to say about the difficulty, I know it kind of mix up difficulty and the length of the game together, but it definitely has a bit of a learning curve. But once you sort of get it, once you sort of understand what's going on, it gets much, much easier. Once you sort of understand what's going on with the resources, what's going on with the game, the best way to look for the exit. Once you get those things down, it gets much, much easier. So RNG and randomness definitely play a fairly large part in this game, I would say. The main elements of RNG are the map layout and what's in each room and where the rooms are. And the other main thing I would say is whether enemies spawn and in which rooms, how much spawn each turn. The map layout is definitely the biggest element of RNG that can really affect your gameplay, especially when you first start playing. So the RNG in the map layout can change whether heroes will spawn behind doors, what kind of resources you get, where you can place large modules, and most importantly, where the exit is. So sometimes you can play a game and you'll find the exit after like the fourth door you've opened. And sometimes you'll play a game, you'll be on one of the later floors, so there's just a lot of rooms in general, and you won't find the exit until the literal last room, which will be like 40 rooms. And so the more doors you have to open to find the exit, the greater chance you have of losing, because you'll have more and more rooms that are empty, unpowered. And so each turn, you have a lot of enemies that spawn that'll just be hard to defeat. Of course, as you play some more, there's a lot of strategy in terms of which doors you open them and how you choose to open the doors and how you choose to defend against these enemies. But it can still be really frustrating when you literally find the exit in the last door. Sort of building off of that randomness, that RNG, is what heroes you find on your run. So with a lot of the different gameplays or the different pods you start out with 2 heroes, for example. And so you can get up to 4 heroes, and so you have to find 2 more throughout the run. And so if you really, really want a runner hero, if you really, really want a damage DPS type of hero and you just don't find one, that can be really, really frustrating. Obviously, a lot of playing roguelite means, dealing with the randomness that comes your way, kind of going with the flow. But it can be really, really important in this game to have characters, to have heroes of certain roles. And so if you can't find that, it can definitely be a little frustrating. And finally, as I mentioned a little bit earlier, there's the RNG each turn. So if you have an empty room, which means it's not powered and there's no heroes in it, then you can have enemies spawn. And so the number of empty rooms that have enemies spawn in them is a little random based. And so you can have like 10 empty rooms, and it's obviously very different to have all 10 of those rooms, spawn enemies versus having 0 of those rooms spawn enemies. And so that can be a little frustrating too when you're just barely hanging in all of your empty rooms spawn enemies and you just get overwhelmed. So that's, again, another element where the RNG and randomness comes in. So as a whole, I would say RNG and randomness play a very important role in this game, especially early on. But, as with any good roguelite, there's ways to counter that. So there's a hero, for example, that can guarantee that you'll find another hero in the next room, so that can help you, try to find a hero if you really need one. There's, strategy of deciding which doors to open. So there are some elements to combat it. There's one pod, for example, where you can choose all 4 heroes from the start. But still, I would say that RNG plays a little too strong of a role in this game, in a way that can be frustrating. So I'm going to talk about the unique mechanics of Dungeon of the Endless and what sort of makes it stand out as a roguelite in its own way. So definitely the main thing that makes it unique is that it's a roguelite, dungeon defense, tower defense, RPG kind of mix in a way that's a lot of fun, in a way that isn't really seen in other games in the roguelite genre. So because of that mix, it doesn't really play like a lot of other roguelites. If you played a lot of roguelites, you probably played a lot of twin stick shooters, you probably played some platformers. So this is really a different take in a way that can be really refreshing if you played a lot of roguelite games. As mentioned earlier, it's a unique mix of turn-based and live-action gameplay, and that's sort of why it feels a lot like Faster Than Light, as I mentioned earlier, because it has that mix of fast-paced live-action gameplay with that ability to pause, that ability to think strategically, that ability to queue up stuff, which really sort of give it that same feel, that same vibe as Faster Than Light. Although obviously a lot of the other gameplay elements are very, very different. You're not on a spaceship and all that kind of stuff. Well, I guess technically you are in a crashed spaceship, but the point still stands. The last thing that's sort of a unique mechanic of this game is that there is multiplayer. You can play co-op, which is present in some roguelites, but definitely not in all. So if you want to play a game where there's 4 of you that kind of play together as different heroes, then that's a possibility and capability of Dungeon of the Endless as well. So now I'll talk about Dungeon of the Endless's sense of progression and replayability. So first, I'll talk about the horizontal progression, which is progression that doesn't really change the difficulty necessarily, but can change the gameplay in some way. So first and foremost, you can unlock different heroes as you play through. This is somewhat RNG dependent. As I mentioned earlier, there's sort of a little crutch of RNG in this game, but it's RNG dependent because you unlock most of the heroes by running into them during your runs, buying them or hiring them, and then playing with them through enough floors or winning the game with them. And then after you do that, you unlock them. Some of them are locks behind the DLC, and I'll talk about those a little bit later. The other main sense of horizontal progression is that you can unlock different pods or spaceships, which are basically equivalent to different types of game modes, and they alter the gameplay without strictly making it harder or easier, although I'll talk about a couple exceptions later. Finally, something that's present in some other games but isn't really present in Dungeons of the Endless is there aren't that many like Easter eggs or secrets to unlock, but there are some achievements that unlock this album of memories, which sort of fit into the narrative that I'll talk about later. So now in terms of vertical progression, which is progression that changes the difficulty in some way, or you try to get further. So like most roguelites, the first challenge is to get as far as you can to try to clear the game. So I would say that the first clear is pretty difficult to do. There's two difficulties at the start. There's very easy and easy, although it's really kind of like very easy is normal and easy is hard. So I originally started playing easy only, and I didn't really get a clear for the longest time, and then I eventually switched to very easy after I sort of figured out the game, and then I got to clear that next game. But I would say it definitely can be a little hard to get that first clear. So as with pretty much all roguelites, that first vertical progression is just, can you clear the game? Additionally, it's not the same as like how far you get or can you clear, but there's a score for each run as well. So there's some vertical progression in the sense of how high of a score can you get on any particular run. In the final sense of vertical progression, as mentioned earlier, a lot of the different pods or game modes you unlock change the game without strictly changing the difficulty. But there are two pods that do sort of strictly change vertical progression or difficulty in some way. So the one pod adds an endless mode, so usually you clear 12 floors and then you clear the game. But in this pod, the drill, you just can keep on going. And then the other pod unlocks a hard mode, which is, even more difficult than the quote quote easy mode, which is already pretty difficult. So those are some two senses of vertical progression that make the game go on longer or forever, or just make it harder. So the narrative or story of Dungeons of the Endless is definitely a positive element of it. So if you've ever played any of the Endless games, so Endless Space 1 or 2 or Endless Legend, it takes place in that same universe. So actually the planet you crash on is the same planet from Endless Legend. So some of the characters you run into, some of the heroes that you have are from Endless Legends. So for example, one of the heroes that you can get is a Broken Lord, and some of the enemies that you faced are some of the city-state third-party creatures from Endless Legend. You don't really get that much literal story as you play through it, but you can really see that it is set in the Endless universe. And as I mentioned earlier, you get these achievements from doing various things in the games, and unlocks these pictures, these memorabilia, these memories, and they fit nicely into the broader Endless universe. So if you played the other Endless games and you want a game that fits into that kind of lore, this is a game that does that really nicely. In addition to the lore that's sort of there, but not necessarily like something you see strictly as you're playing through, there are some interactions between some of the characters. So there's a couple main types of characters. For the non-DLC characters, there's prisoners, guards, and natives. And so if you get certain groups of those together, they'll talk back and forth about how they ended up on this ship. The main story is about this prison ship crashing. So the heroes were either prisoners on the ship, they were guards on the ship, or they were natives. And the interaction between them can be kind of interesting and have a little bit of story. But I wouldn't really sell Dungeons of the Endless as a roguelite full of story, but it definitely fits into this richer Endless world. And there are some backstories of some of the heroes. So it has more lore, more story than most roguelites. But I mean, it's still definitely a roguelite. It's not story driven. The final thing I want to talk about before I sort of issue a verdict for Dungeons of the Endless is the DLC. So the DLC, strictly speaking, just adds more heroes, adds more pods, which are basically, as I mentioned earlier, just game modes, adds more enemy types, adds more modules. So it really just adds a lot of everything that's already in the game. And so in that sense, it definitely adds a lot more variety. Also, I would say it definitely makes the game more fun. If you've played the game for a while and you like it, getting the DLC sort of gives it a fresh look without really reinventing the whole game. In regard to the heroes that you unlock, some of the more interesting and some of the frankly just better heroes are locked behind the DLC. So for example, there's one hero that lets you tame monsters and sort of use them as a pet, which is fun and unique, and it's, in the DLC. So as a whole, I would say the DLC is definitely not mandatory. You really don't need it to enjoy the game, to get the core gameplay of Dungeons of the Endless. But if you do like what you're doing, it can really add a lot of replayability, and it can give you some heroes, some new modules that just add a little more variety to the game that help it from getting stale. And because so much of roguelites is that replayability, is that variety, I would say it's definitely a good purchase if you like the game. So now for my overview, summary, and verdict for Dungeon of the Endless. As a whole, I would give it a soft recommend, or a recommend with some caveats. So it's definitely a really good game, it's definitely a fun game, and it's definitely unique. So in that sense, I think it's a good addition to the roguelite genre. It's a game that plays a lot different than a lot of other roguelites. So I would recommend it to you if you have already played a lot of roguelites and you want a roguelite that's fun, but also a little different than something you've played. I would also recommend it to you if you played Faster Than Light and you want a game that has that same sort of feel, but isn't, exactly Faster Than Light all over again. I'd recommend it to you then. I would also recommend it to you if you want a game with tower defense or dungeon defense elements. That said, while this game does have RPG elements, they're only really okay. If you want a roguelite with RPG elements, there's definitely better ones out there. But if you want a roguelite with RPG elements and the other things I mentioned earlier, then totally go for it and check it out, as it is a good game. It definitely has the downside, as mentioned earlier, being sort of over-reliant on RNG in a way that can be frustrating. You can very quickly go from doing perfectly fine to suddenly being overwhelmed and one of your heroes dying. Additionally, the gameplay at times can be a little tedious, especially once you've gotten decent at the game and you're just sort of getting through some of the intermediate levels or the floors that just aren't very difficult in order to get somewhere further. So the game at times can kind of drag on. And finally, the DLC, if you're interested in the game, if you like it, feel free to grab the DLC. As a whole, the base game goes on sale pretty frequently for about $3, so it's pretty cheap, as a lot of roguelites are. And the DLC goes on sale for about $3 as well. I think you can buy them both together for like $5 when they go on sale. So if you're interested in a roguelite that's a little bit different, a little unique, then this can be a good roguelite for you. But if you're new to roguelites, you just want to find the classic, really good, best roguelites, then there are better roguelites out there for you to play first. So that's it. Thanks for watching. I'll probably review Slay the Spire or Hades in my next game, so stay tuned for that.